Are the states going to be charged with coming up with this proper training? And will they be required for conducting said training? Is the federal government going to do it? I mean, they've done such a great job with, the Department of Education and providing that sort of training and education. I mean, look at the results in our schools. But I digress. Well, we're halfway through the list, believe it or not. I'm going to take a quick pause for the cause. We'll come back on the other side and catch the remainder of the president's 23 new executive actions on gun violence. You're listening to the Palmetto Conservative Show here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Feeling lonely this holiday season?
Looking for little human interaction?
Do you want to feel contact in certain special places?
Then why not go through security at an airport?
The TSA.
TSA agents are ready and standing by to give you a little something extra to feel thankful about this holiday season.
The TSA.
What are you waiting for? I want to check under your testicles.
Spending time with a TSA agent couldn't be easier. Simply book a flight departing from any American airport. When selected for a full body scanner, say no. You'll be pulled aside by a TSA agent, and that's when the fun begins. And you never know who your agent will be.
It could be me.
Or me. Or even me.
But it's probably gonna be us. Take off your damn shoes.
The TSA. It's our business to touch yours.
Welcome to the Bureau of Womanhood Conformity. Independent thoughts are considered subversive because all must agree with our leader.
When it comes to women, preventative care should include coverage of contraceptive services such as birth control.
You see, if you don't believe government should pay for your birth control, you're not a real woman. Womanhood denied. If you refuse to accept that pregnancy is a punishment, you're denied as well.
I don't want them punished with a baby.
If you don't believe that abortions should be allowed for any reason, if you don't believe in aborting a child for being the wrong gender, and if you don't believe that stay-at-home mothers aren't real workers, you are not a real conformed woman.
His wife has actually never worked a day in her life. His wife has actually never worked a day in her life.
Finally, for your safety, if you oppose mandatory government health care, you will die.
They will be voting to say that women can die on the floor.
These standards and regulations were formed after our glorious victory in the war on women. Thank you for your cooperation and your conformity.
I ain't working.
And welcome back into the Palmetto Conservative Show. I'm your host, Jim Lee, here on the Conservative Broadcast Media Network. Last we left you, we were reviewing the 23 new executive actions. 23 separate, Whether or not they're new, that's a good question. 23 separate executive actions that the President and the administration, or his administration, will be will initiate regarding gun violence. We left you at number 12. Provide law enforcement, first responders, and school officials with proper training for active shooter situations. Moving on to number 13. Maximize enforcement efforts to prevent gun violence and prosecute gun crime. Now, how does one maximize enforcement efforts and whose enforcement efforts will we be maximizing. And in maximizing enforcement efforts, how will that prevent gun violence? And aren't we already prosecuting gun crime? If not, why not? Number 14. Issue a presidential memorandum directing the Centers for Disease Control to research the causes and prevention of gun violence. This one I find to be actually instructive on several levels. Number one, I believe that the number one initiative the president is going to undertake with regards to gun violence is to issue presidential memorandum. And just the mere fact that he's issuing so many presidential memorandum are going to scare guns so much that they'll never be violent again. Number two, the causes and prevention of gun violence falling into the hands of the Centers for Disease Control says to me that all gun violence and the causes of all gun violence have to do with disease. And in this case, he may be onto something, because it truly is a disease. But the disease that we have is one of culture. Our culture is suffering from a disease that's been 100 years in the making, and that in the last 60 years has really come to full exposure. And that is the breakdown of the traditional mores and values upon which this country was founded. Now, it's safe to say that there has never been a time in our country's history where every single citizen in this country was a monolithic Christian. But it is also safe to say that for nearly the first 200 years of this country's existence, if not the first 175, ,99% of the people in this country operated on a traditional Judeo-Christian ethic, a Judeo-Christian value system. Not a religion, but a value system. And now we're suffering from a disease. The disease is what used to be considered wrong is now right, and what used to be considered right is now wrong. And we have lost the culture to progressives and moral relativists who can't see that which is plain as the nose on their face, how the destruction of our consensus Judeo-Christian values and the breakdown of the nuclear family and the disrespect for the traditions of marriage and life and the value of personhood. That disease is what is rampant. But it's doubtful that the Centers for Disease Control can come up with a cure, because it's not something you can take a shot for. It's not something that you can take a couple of aspirin and go rest for a while and come back and it'll be all better. It'll be interesting to see where that particular initiative goes. Number 15, direct the Attorney General, once again, that paragon of virtue, to issue a report on the availability and most effective use of new gun safety technologies and challenge the private sector to develop innovative technologies. Gun control is known as two hands on the weapon. Gun safety, essentially training. You know, it is possible to make guns so safe that they become useless or of no use other than being a club. And I think there are some who believe that that is what we need to do. But again, the Attorney General, that paragon of virtue, is going to issue a report, and that would assume that there was some sort of study and analysis prior to issuing said report, unless this is a typical government report where someone who knows absolutely nothing about the topic that they're supposed to issue a report about will sit down and pontificate and write a document that has absolutely no basis in fact or reality and provides absolutely no real solutions to any real problems, but does one thing and one thing only. It wastes the ink and the paper upon which it's printed. Number 16. Clarify the Affordable Care Act. Clarify that the Affordable Care Act does not prohibit doctors asking their patients about guns in their homes. So is this a tacit acknowledgement that the Affordable Care Act perhaps isn't quite clear? All 2,900 pages of it, you think? And what's behind this? You know, first of all, why is a doctor asking their patients about guns in their homes? Now, if a patient comes to the doctor suffering from a gunshot wound and the doctor is asking a reasonable question, where were you shot? This looks like a gunshot wound. Were you shot with a gun? Yes, I was. Where were you shot? I was in my home. Okay, well that sounds relevant. But for doctors to be asking their patients about guns in their homes, to me, is just another step towards the grander nanny state. Somebody's got to watch out and provide this false sense of security that they're looking out for you. Number 17, release a letter to healthcare providers clarifying that no federal law prohibits them from reporting threats of violence to law enforcement authorities. Well, it depends on who the healthcare provider is, I suppose. And I'm assuming somewhere they've defined what a threat of violence is. But I'm curious as to why they feel they need to release a letter to clarify that. Why would people think that there was a federal law that prevented them? Maybe it's because of all of the ACLU BS over the last several decades. And trying to maintain the confidentiality of information around pedophiles and drug dealers and murderers, but requiring the release of information on law-abiding citizens. Number 18, provide incentives for schools to hire school resource officers. I think I've got it. Incentives is kind of like investments in political speak. So apparently there are not any incentives whatsoever for school systems to hire school resource officers. Other than, it is their responsibility, the school